Dear Mr. Mayor and members of the council, I want to make a brief presentation. I have asked clerk to circulate the one-page, so it's probably either in your files or other, with the hope that you will in fact do what Betty just suggested, that is delay this approval and take the time to discuss the issue at stake, which really creates a precedent for taller buildings in the North Venice area. The project applicant is asking for 3 buildings of 60 or more feet. Virtually the majority of the buildings out there are asked for additional conditional use, and the city has indeed granted the remainder 45 feet because of the 10-foot parking underline. The material I got today was a little bit confused, and I realized Mr. Miller's got a lot of projects, and it's hard for him to probably speak off the top of his head about how many 60-foot buildings there were or how many 45, but you had in the chart that staff presented a clear indication that there are a number of buildings. The majority of buildings are asking for conditional approval, and others don't need it because the city has already granted them 45 feet with regard to the planning. The primary objective of mine is to ask you to recognize that there's no specific, form-based plan for this area called North Venice. And I've talked to Mr. Black, and certainly he and the planning staff have an overall plan with roadways and general parameters. But for example, the public has never seen a presentation that suggested 60-foot buildings out in that area, has never given you feedback on whether they would like that concept. I am appreciative of the height overlays you just passed here in the city, indicating the council has a sensitivity to that issue. And I'm not so sure it wouldn't be, if there were time taken and consultation with the urban planners, you might not decide to have a similar kind of height overlay for that entire North Venice area. But once you put in these 60-foot buildings, it's going to be very hard for you not to approve 60-foot buildings for everyone, and so that basically is the concern I have. I am concerned, well, I had the precedent about height, but the development in general is an undistinguished suburban sprawl with rows of 4-story condominiums. As you looked at that, I lived in the City of Pittsburgh Housing Authority when I was a student, and that's exactly what you had, these rows of 4-story buildings separated by a little green space, and it's really a long way from any kind of a new town, a new urbanist design. If it was in fact one, the commercial area would be in the middle, where people could walk to it, and it would be surrounded by that. That's kind of one of the key concepts. So this really is more aimed at travelers off the interstate. And the people who live in the Venetian Golf and River Club and the other clubs that Judge Moore pointed out, the other cities, they're going to have to go past this rather urbanized, dense development to get to their less dense developments. So I believe if you would delay or turn down the conditional use request, it could be that Mr. Miller would work with some urban planners and his designers. He's already suggesting he's not totally sure he's going to be able to build out to these parameters, and so there'd be a good chance he could come up with a design that would be both within the height limitations.
You have 1 minute.
Thank you. Would be within the height limitations, and one that would not lead to an amorphous mass of 60-foot buildings out there that all of us may look back on as we do some current buildings and say, wow, I wish we didn't do that 10 years ago or 15 years ago. So I think the decision you make today, and I realize it's the first one you've made under this conditional use thing, is a very precedent-setting decision. And I hope you'll take the time to think about it, because you will set in force a development pattern out there that will be very difficult to turn back once you've approved this. Thank you.
You certainly confuse me. The rows of 4-story buildings around Carnegie Tech or Pitt are sprawl?
Well,
I thought sprawl was when you had houses, single-family houses spread over massive amounts of land.
That's a very good question. There are two kinds of sprawl, and one is a kind of a urban sprawl, and one is a suburban sprawl. And the urban sprawl are these massive developments you see in many cities of relatively identical buildings lined up in parallel rows. That's what you have here. The suburban sprawl you're talking about can be what people call developments, perhaps even like Golden Beach that I live in, or others that are not compressed but are houses in residential areas and roads and so forth. But my point today is that while I think I agree with Judge Moore that's not really an asset to the community, that's not really the issue. The issue is, are you going to grant conditional height here, and are you going to unleash a set of forces that you're all going to perhaps regret down the road, or could you ask the developer to rethink this a little bit and perhaps come in with a revised plan that wouldn't require you to give him conditional use?
So I'm still not sure. You think we should grow out, not up?
I think you can achieve these purposes without going to 60 feet, Mr. Mayor, is my own feeling. And as for the other buildings, whether it's 5 feet or 10 feet, I don't think that's a great issue. I think the density and the architectural structure of them and the layout structure is pedestrian, and it's not something that perhaps could be done on a new urbanist model with the consultation of someone like that. For example, you could conceivably move the shopping center into the middle of the area and make it a real village center. And that may not be Mr. Miller's wish, and I think he should have the right to develop the property, and he should develop it as he wishes. I think it's his property, but I don't think you necessarily have to grant him the conditional use for height, because I think it will have an impact on, like dominoes, on the rest of that area. Okay, thank you for the thought. I appreciate it.
Mr. Mayor, I have a question for Mr. Martin.
Yes.
Mr. Martin, you mentioned that you live in Golden Beach.
I do indeed.
You live on Everglades.
I do indeed.
And
You have the wrong location when you wrote your letter to the editor, but I recognize your letters to the editor are often factually incorrect. You also had me having an estate on Long Island.
Can you
So-
speak into the mic more?
Yes.
on what year did you become a full-time Florida resident at your house on Everglades?
1994. I bought it in 93 and let the people who lived in it, who were building a house in Waterford, rent it until their house was completed. And I moved in after they vacated.
And at the end of Everglades and slightly to the north on the beach is the tallest condominium building on the beach in Venice, correct?
Yes, and if there had been a wiser council, it wouldn't be there.
And that building was there when you decided to buy the house where you live now.
I live roughly 2 blocks from that building, which is not in my direct line of sight. What's in my direct line of sight down the street, Jeff, is low one-story residences that look out.
You can't see the MacArthur Beach building from your house.
I have to look for it, and I have to look over surrounding trees and so forth.
Right. So in other words, roughly a block or a block and a half away from a 10-story building, you have to look to see it.
Because it's not in the line. In your earlier letter,
but
you said it was right down at the end of my street, and I had to look at it, and I'm telling you the truth, I don't. But as I said, you often don't have your facts right.